Hi everyone, welcome to or welcome back to my channel. My name is Monty if you are new here, and today I'm going to be telling you about all the books that I read in October. In total, I read 9 books, which is a little bit on the higher end for me, but I did read 3 novellas, so I feel like I probably still read the same total number of pages, even though my book count is a little bit higher than average. Pretty much all of these books were featured in different vlogs that I did over the last month, so I will link those vlogs down below if you want to go watch them. But I know that not everyone likes watching reading vlogs, and some people just like to come and watch reading wrap-ups and get quick, succinct reviews of books that they're interested in. So I wanted to go ahead and make this video anyway. So let's just get into it. The first book that I have to talk about is Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. This is my first Murakami that I have ever read. I, for some reason, was really intimidated to read anything by this author. I was kind of under the impression that his works were gonna read like classics. I thought that they were gonna be just really dense and difficult to get through, but the writing itself is actually really straightforward, really simple, and not overly complex. The story, however, is one of the most unique stories that I've ever read. It takes on a very dreamlike quality. I felt like I was in a trance while reading this book because it feels like you're in the real world for the most part, but then there are these moments and these situations of complete and total absurdity. And you kind of just have to accept it and not question it too much, the same way that I feel like you experience a dream. You're just kind of along for the ride. So in this book, we are following 2 principal characters. One is a 15-year-old boy who is going under the name of Kafka. He has run away from home trying to escape his father and this very weird prophecy that he's been burdened with. And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have this elderly gentleman named Nakata, who in his childhood suffered this trauma that resulted in him not being able to read, but giving him the ability to talk to cats. So there's a little bit of the absurd that I'm talking about. These 2 storylines run parallel to each other, and at times they will converge. And then at the end, you are ultimately left with more questions than you had going in to the reading experience, which admittedly is not my favorite. I love to have clarity at the end of my books. I'm someone who loves to have answers to her questions, but I kind of knew that this is where the book was headed, and so I wasn't disappointed when I got to the end and I still didn't know what was going on. It's very much a book focused on the journey and not the destination. Some things to note before you pick this up if you are thinking about it. There is some pretty weird sex stuff in here, and it's not like smutty sex stuff, it's just weird. And I've learned that this is kind of a trademark for Murakami. I felt mostly neutral about the sex scenes that were presented in this book. There was one that I found to be off-putting, but overall I just was like, oh, interesting. The book did get a little pretentious at times and overly philosophical, which some people might really love. There were times where I did enjoy the tidbits of wisdom thrown in there, and there were times where it was just flying over my head. I also know that some people take issue with the way Murakami writes women, and I can't speak too in depth about it because, again, this is just the only book that I've ever read by him. I personally didn't really mind it in this book. Yes, the female characters weren't really fleshed out, but I didn't necessarily think that he wrote about them in a misogynistic way. It just felt like he didn't know how to write women, and I would prefer that an author not attempt to write women if he doesn't know how to, versus trying to write women and failing in doing that. But everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and I have yet to read other books by him, so I'll probably formulate a more thorough opinion on the matter later on. Overall, I really enjoyed the like middle 50% of the book. The beginning was hard for me to get into, and the end was a little bit rough for me too, just with knowing that I wasn't going to have my questions answered. I did buddy read this with someone, and I would recommend doing that. I would recommend having someone to kind of externally process your thoughts with. This is just like the type of book that lends to a discussion, so it would also be like a great book club pick. And yeah, I landed on a 3.5 out of 5 stars for this one. I definitely enjoyed it, and I would like to read more of his books, but I probably need to get into the right headspace before I do that. After that, I picked up Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and I absolutely flew through this book. I devoured this in, I think, a 2-day period. Basically, any chance that I had to read it, I was doing that. Was it a literary masterpiece? No. But was it incredibly fun? Yes. This is a blend of fantasy and romance, but I would say that it leans heavily towards the romance side. This is a world that has magic sort of embedded within it. There's magical objects and charms, and then there are these gods with power that sort of roam the earth. And 2 of these gods in particular are waging war against one another, and they are recruiting humans to aid them in their fight. So that ends up being like the major backdrop for the romance story. We hear a lot about civilian life during war times, which I thought was really well done. Gives it a little bit of like this historical fiction feel as well. I think that this book was inspired by either World War I or World War II. But the primary story at hand, we're following our 2 characters, Iris and Roman. They are both journalists who are working at the same newspaper, and they are vying for the same promotion. So it appears at first glance that it's going to be like an enemies to rivals story, but I don't really think that that's a great description of what this ends up being. I would argue that Iris and Roman are more competitors than rivals. There's not like a great deal of animosity between the 2, and any negative ideas or perceptions they had about the other person, it all gets quickly resolved early on in the book. I would say about 15 to 20% of the way through, they are like no longer at odds with each other. And in this very weird, magical twist of fate, Iris and Roman end up writing letters back and forth to one another, but one of them is unaware of who they are writing to. And it is through this correspondence that they forge a really strong connection that ultimately unfolds into their love story. I thought this was just a really good time, nothing to gush over, but it was fun and entertaining and fast. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I think that it would be the perfect book to pick up to get you out of a reading slump. Then I read The Rom-Commers by Katherine. This is the only book that isn't featured in one of my reading vlogs, and I want to give a little bit of a backstory as to why I picked this one up. So in 2023, I read The Bodyguard by Katherine. It was my first book by her, and it ended up being my favorite romance that I read in the entire year. It had everything that I love in a romance book. It had a quaint setting, an interesting plot setup, found family, likable characters, and it also didn't have a 3rd act breakup with miscommunication, and I just loved everything about it. Then earlier this year, I picked up my 2nd book by this author, Hello Stranger, and I did not like it. So I wanted to pick up a 3rd book by her to serve as kind of a tiebreaker, and I ended up picking up The Rom-Commers because it's her most recent release. It came out earlier this summer, I think. And I tend to believe that authors get better with time, so presumably her most recent work would be her best work, but unfortunately, this was my least favorite book of hers that I have read to date. So we are following our main female character. I don't remember her name, but she is a writer who has never gotten to reach her full potential in her career because for the last 10 years of her life, she has served as the caretaker for her dad, who has been afflicted with a whole host of medical conditions. And so her dad kind of needs this like 24-hour supervision, and Emma, I think her name's Emma, has taken it upon herself to do that for her dad because she loves him. But again, it's been at the expense of her furthering her writing career. And then one day she gets this opportunity to work with her favorite screenwriter of all time, Charlie Yates. And so she takes it, she flies out to Florida, and her younger sister temporarily fills in for her as their dad's caretaker. And Emma and Charlie worked together to write a rom-com, hence the name The Rom-commers. Ultimately, the reason that I did not like this book is I hated our main male lead. He was rude, he was condescending. There are multiple occasions where he's talking absolute trash about the female main character behind her back, and she overhears him and just like looks the other way. And she never actually confronts him about the shitty things that she's heard him say about her. And listen, I am just never gonna be that interested in a story where the man mistreats the woman repeatedly, she looks the other way, and then all is like magically forgiven at the end. Even if there is a reason for why he was acting poorly, it's just not my bag. I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars, and the only reason that I didn't give it a 1-star rating is because I loved every single scene that her dad appeared in. Like, if Katherine Center had written a book about Emma and her father's relationship, I would have eaten that up, but she wrote this instead, sadly. Next, I have 3 sci-fi novellas to talk about that I read for my sci-fi novella reading vlog, and each of these books is actually the first in their own respective series. So none of the books that I'm going to be talking about are standalones. I can continue with some of them. First, we have Binti by Nnedi Okorafur. This is the shortest of the 3, running at just 90 pages. And here's the thing, I feel like an author has to be very skilled in order to write a fully developed story in the span of 90 pages, and I just don't feel like that's what happened here. We are following our title character, Binti, who is the first of her people, her tribe, the Himba people, to be offered a spot at the most prestigious university in the galaxy. And she decides to attend against the wishes of her very insular community. The story focuses mostly on Binti's journey to get from her home planet to the university and all the different troubles that she faces along the way. This was just not a very interesting story to me. I had a hard time caring about what was happening, and I just really didn't like the ending. It felt super convenient, like a little too easy, and it just wasn't satisfying. Another 2.5 stars from me. 1 star for the awesome premise that I was really excited to delve into. Another star for the culture and diversity issues that were brought up, and another half point for just writing a novella, something that I will never be able to do. So props. I don't know if I'm going to continue on with this series. There's a part of me that wants to, because I'm pretty sure the second book is going to take place at the university, and I think I would really enjoy that. So to be determined. After that, I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells. Sorry, the lighting is making it a little hard to see, but this is the first in the Murderbot diaries. Of the 3 novellas that I picked up for that reading vlog, this is definitely the most sci-fi heavy, I would say. We are following Murderbot, our main character, whose job is to provide security to humans as they go on these different interplanetary missions, but all Murderbot really wants to do is binge watch TV series in their own private quarters. Very silly, I know. Murderbot is such an endearing character, very socially awkward, has a hard time engaging with humans, very introverted, but also very funny. At the start of this novella, Murderbot is accompanying a group of scientists as they survey this distant planet, and things start to go awry. And so Murderbot is forced to interact with the humans more and more than they would like. This was simultaneously humorous and thrilling, heartwarming, but adventurous. A really quick and enjoyable read, which is really nice because there are so many more books to continue on with in this series. There is a good amount of technical jargon that was lost on me, so I wasn't fully engaged during those parts, and I definitely didn't comprehend everything that happened in this book. And because of that, I probably wouldn't recommend it to someone who is completely brand new to the sci-fi genre. I gave this 4 stars, really enjoyed it, and will be continuing with the series. The last sci-fi novella that I read for this vlog was A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers. This book takes place on the planet of Panga, and we learn that centuries prior, the robots of Panga began to gain consciousness and decided to live out their days in the wild. So they leave humanity. In present day, we're following our main character, Dex, who is a tea monk, and Dex's job is basically to travel from town to town and offer town members a warm cup of tea along with their counsel. Eventually, Dex starts to feel pretty unfulfilled and ventures out into the wilderness and comes across a robot by the name of Mosscap. We mostly follow the conversations between Dex and Mosscap on the meaning of existence, the purpose of life. So it does get very philosophical, but in a very digestible way. This is definitely not your standard action-packed sci-fi book. It's more of like a cozy read with deep introspection. So if you are looking for a book that is very thought-provoking, I would highly recommend this one. I absolutely loved it. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and 100% will be picking up the next one as soon as I can get my hands on it. Now I have 3 mystery thriller books to talk about that I read in a thriller vlog that I posted a couple of weeks ago. Interestingly, I chose 3 books that had these larger social commentaries sort of woven into them, and because of that, I ended up enjoying every single one of these, which is quite a feat because I don't really rate thrillers very highly. First, we have Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany Jackson. This is a YA mystery where we are following a 12-year-old girl by the name of Claudia. She lives in DC, and her best friend Monday goes missing one day. No one seems to care except for Claudia that Monday has gone missing, and so Claudia takes it upon herself to do the investigative work and find out what has happened to her friend. This is a really, really dark book. It's incredibly heartbreaking, and it tackles the very serious issue of those who are often forgotten by society, and in this particular case, we're talking about young Black girls. The formatting of this book was a little bit disorienting. It's told in a non-chronological manner. So each chapter title vaguely tells you where you are in the timeline. It'll say before or after, or before the before, or after the after. But it doesn't tell you exactly what point you are in the timeline, which definitely gets pretty confusing at times and like would take me out of the story. It ultimately does serve a purpose that you find out at the end of the book, but I don't know if it really makes up for the reading experience up until that point. I also had pretty mixed feelings about like the major plot twist at the end of the book. I went into this book with my thriller reading glasses on, and yeah, like the plot twist at the very end felt like something I'd seen before. But I think that if you approach this book thinking that you're getting into a YA contemporary rather than like a YA thriller, you would have a completely different reading experience than me, and you'd probably enjoy it even more than I did. Overall, I definitely enjoyed it. It held my attention, and I feel like it talked about a topic that I don't see discussed very much in literature and something that's really important for us to talk about. So I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll, a super, super popular book that I've been seeing pop up in like everyone's reading wrap-ups lately. I loved this book. This was my only full-blown 5 out of 5 star read of the month of October. And I gotta say, I was not expecting that. This is about a real-life celebrity serial killer, which I think is sickening that this person has been immortalized as a celebrity for killing innocent people. The first chapter in this book is 80 pages long, and it spans one single day, following the president of the sorority as her house gets attacked by the serial killer. This is probably the most gruesome part of the book and the most difficult part of the book to read, so beware going into it. And from there, we basically follow this president of the sorority and another woman who's been affected by this man's killing sprees as they try to take him down. The author, in my opinion, does a wonderful job of dismantling the idea that this man is anything but an incompetent monster. She really illustrates the point well that this man and men like him, the only reason that they're able to evade consequences isn't due to their own cunning, but really it's due to poor police work and pervasive sexism. It is much easier for the police force to paint this guy as an untouchable genius rather than admit to their own mistakes that allowed for him to get away in the first place. I loved the way that Jessica Knoll was able to make me care deeply about the women she wrote about and not give a flying fuck about the murderer and his life. And this is how the story should have been told originally, and I am so sorry to all women who have ever had to read about their predators talked about in a positive way in the media, because it happens all the time. So if you're a woman and you're looking to feel mad, then Bright Young Women. And that brings me to my final book that I read in the month of October, which is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. Okay, this book is wild, and it is not for the faint of heart. In this book, we are following a black man named Ike and a white man named Buddy. Both of these men are ex-cons who are connected through their sons who are married to one another. Right at the start of the book, we learn that their sons have been murdered. While their sons were alive, both of these fathers had a really hard time accepting the fact that they were gay, and in the wake of their death, fueled by regret, Buddy and Ike decide to solve and avenge their murders. This book is super violent, graphic, vulgar, crude. It is not for everyone. It is incredibly action-packed. You will just fly through it. And all of this is happening at the surface, but underneath the fast-paced plot, there are some really deep themes at play in this book. There's discussions about homophobia, racism, regret, fatherhood. Some of my favorite parts in this book were when Ike was drawing parallels between his own internalized homophobia and the racism that he himself has been on the receiving end of. It was just really special to see him challenge and overcome some of his own biases over the course of this book. There were times when this book definitely felt really over the top, and occasionally it felt a little bit too preachy. I prefer more subtlety with my messaging, but still really liked it. If you feel like you can stomach the intensity, then I would highly recommend. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And those are all the books that I read in October. Videos that are upcoming, things to look forward to. I'm gonna be participating in Nonfiction November, so I'm currently in the middle of filming a reading vlog for that. I'm also planning on doing another genre TBR video, probably fantasy. So yes, you can be looking forward to those. Let me know down below what your reading plans are for the end of 2024. It's starting to get pretty chilly outside, and I'm just so looking forward to cozying up and reading as much as I can. Anyway, I hope that you are all doing fantastic. Let me know if you read any of the books that I talked about in this video, or let me know what you're currently reading, and I will see you next time. Bye.